And also, when I think about it, I don't think we have defined human nature with a definition before. So
Yeah.
that's also something to think about that we could.
Yeah, perhaps we should start there. I think that's a good. It's always good to start with a definition. So, and since we have based morality to a large part on human nature, then in our last video, then it would be useful to define human nature. So it's also a big task. I think the first thing that I would want to say, and that's just as a start, is that there is some, or at least that's how I see it, there is some material or empirical basis to human nature. So we see, again, of course, this is my materialist axiom or view of the world, but we see human beings in reality and we see them do certain things, and then we try to extract from this the concept of what it means to be human by comparing these entities that we instinctively perceive to be humans, comparing them and differentiating them from all other things that exist which are not human beings. And we try to find out, okay, what makes the distinction? What makes something a human being or not? And that would then be the human nature.
Yes, that seems very true, that we are trying to capture what makes beings unique apart from other kinds of creatures. So I would say that human nature is that which makes a human being instead of other types of things like dogs or cats or rabbits or stones or trees. So it is that which makes us a specific kind of thing, because human beings alongside cars, dogs, and cats, we all exist, we're all beings in reality, but we are different. We're different kinds of beings. And we are that kind of being which we can call humanity. And that is what all human beings by essence share in common, which makes them human beings. So when we say that this or that is according to human nature, that would mean that there is something about this that we discuss which is related to a human being as such.
Yes, yes, very good. And also to a human being in particular. So because Aristotle, I think, has formulated this idea that there are kind of different layers of, I think it was called the soul, but you could also call it the nature of something. So, for example, there are living beings, which includes trees and cats and dogs and fish and insects. And then there are animals as compared to plants. And then there are insects or mammalia. And then there are, for example, primates. And then there are human beings. And so you should, and these are kind of different layers of things. Now, a human being also shares these things that all primates share, or that all mammalia share, or all animals, or all living beings. But that which is specifically the human nature is that which sets them. Now that's the question. I think the human nature would include all of these other lower level natures, if you so want, but there would also be some distinguishing aspect which is only applicable to human beings, which differentiates them from all of the other living beings.
Yes, exactly. So the classical definition of a human being would be a rational animal. And there we see that, okay, there are some things that we have in common with certain other creatures, we are animals, so we have animality, you might say, in common with dogs and rabbits, etc. And you can also go even lower than that and talk about we are living organisms, which we have in common even with trees and plants. But okay, going back to the definition of rational animal, okay, so we have animality in common with other animals, but there is something unique about us, which distinguishes us essentially from cats and dogs and ants. And that would be primarily our capacity for rational deliberation. We have intelligence, we have reason, we can conceptualize abstract objects, etc. And that makes us unique compared to these other animals. Also, a note about the soul, according to Aristotle, would be considered the form of a living organism. So for him, a soul is that which makes a living organism living, the principle of life, or the principle of animation, you might say. And that is what makes a living organism different from that specific organism, but that it has the soul, that which gives it life. And then he would say that human beings have also soul because we are living organisms, but our soul is more complex, or of a higher nature, because we have intelligence and reason within our soul, as well as this general principle of animation. So we can also go into the issue of matter and form and hylomorphism if you want to talk more about what that means, but yeah, I'll let you decide.
Yes, interesting. I think we could go into that after we have kind of closed this question about human nature, or this definition, because it might be also relevant. So yeah, I think you mentioned it. The classical definition is that man is the rational animal, so that rationality is that which sets human beings apart from all other animals. And I guess the way I experience it, that is true, because I was thinking about, for example, also Aristotle pointed out that human beings are also social animals. So that is also a part, you would say, of human nature, or at least the way I understand it. But that is not the distinguishing criteria, because there are other social animals as well, like certain primates, or wolves, or penguins, or I don't know, many mammalia are in some sense social animals. There are even social insects. And so perhaps that's something different. But so the social aspect is crucial for human beings, but it's not that which sets them apart from all other living beings. And the same can be said for other things, like I mentioned in the beginning, the propensity to do violence in some situations. So there are human beings that kill other human beings. There are also chimpanzees that kill other chimpanzees sometimes. And there are also, perhaps in other animal species, there are fights where one animal kills another one of its own kind. And or there is this thing, I heard this once, that, for example, orangutans, their rape is quite common, so that males will just basically grab a female if they can and rape them. And it's just if there is a stronger male around who is kind of the alpha male of this group of women, then he will chase away other smaller males. But so you could say, it's, since human beings are also primates, then it's also in our nature to do these things, and therefore we have this problem in how do we define human nature, and do we say, are these things now part of human nature, or are they not, and if not, why not? And so I think that's a question that's been bothering me a little bit lately.
Right, yes, that's a big question, a very interesting question to discuss. And I would say that we could say that things that are according to human nature, or things that are based on human nature, would be, we say, attributes or properties which a human being has by virtue of being a human being. So to take some very obvious examples, human beings have one head, two hands, and 5 fingers on each hand, 2 legs, a heart, 2 lungs, etc. All those are natural features of the human body. They are connected to our nature as a human being. And we would also say that about certain, you could say, emotional features of human beings. For instance, that, and here we get also into differences between the biological sex within humanity, that is between men and women, because there are differences when it comes to, say, emotional features, how human beings respond to specific circumstances and situations. But generally speaking, about human beings, we have emotions like, you could say, joy, but also anger and frustration in different forms, sadness. We experience these different kinds of things, and we have also biological needs. We can thirst, we can feel hunger. And you could say that all of these things can be basis for different things that human beings do that still we consider immoral, and we can get more into that, but at least we can say that people who commit violence against other human beings in an immoral fashion, those feelings which might motivate the person to do an illegitimate act of violence, that in itself, that feeling in itself, is according to human nature. Like anger, let's say a person kills another human being in anger, that's a very serious act to do. But let's say that that person does it out of anger. That anger is something that human beings have, at least in capacity. And then there is the question of, okay, how do you use that anger according to what is good for you as a human being? So I would say that we have a distinction there that is relevant. And here we can also get into the question of free will and how to organize your emotions and other things in a manner that is good according to your humanity. And that is where morality and stuff like that comes in.
Yes, that's a very, very good and valuable point that you brought up there, and possibly exactly the crux of the matter is that the drives or the emotions or the desires or the fears that kind of motivate certain human action, these feelings or drives or desires are a part of human nature. And sometimes we share them with other animals, and sometimes they are more specific to just human beings, but still these things are a part of what it means to be a human being. But that which is the big question, I read this once in a great book. He said, between the stimulus and the response, there is the free will. So the free will is exactly this link between the stimulus and the response. So you experience a certain emotion or a certain fact from the outside world that is affecting you, but then the question of how you respond to this thing and how you act, this is not set, because human beings have this capacity to decide to act in this manner or in a completely different manner. So perhaps if you take a more primitive animal like a dog and you always beat it, then it will just be like a beaten dog, and it will always walk around like this with his tail between his legs and always stay somewhere in a corner and be very frightened. But human beings don't have a pre-programmed way they react to inputs from the world or from their own psyche or subconscious. So there is this faculty of controlling how you respond, and I think that's a great thing that you pointed out here, and that there is where the morality lies.
Yes, that is a good point. Human beings have intelligence and they have free will. We have free will, and that also distinguishes us from other animals. That's part of our rationality, you might say. And thus we can make choices, and some of these choices are good for human beings, or we can choose between different things, and some of the things we may choose is good for us, while certain other things are bad for us. And you could say that, okay, all forms of action is driven by some form of motivation, something within that man that drives him toward doing that, like emotions, and you can ultimately ground those emotions in human nature. However, how we order those emotions and what we decide to do with that can be either contrary to human nature or according to human nature. Like, let's say you have a very insane, crazy person who cuts off his hand in some because he's delusional or mentally ill in some form. You could say that, okay, his craziness, his mental illness is ultimately in some way grounded in his nature as a mental being, and that mental realm within himself has a certain way of being. However, that could still be disordered and contrary to what it should be. And you can also use that in a way that is harmful to yourself and literally destroy a certain part of yourself. And you can say that about human beings doing immoral stuff. Let's say theft or killing an innocent person or some other serious harm. You could say that, okay, that might be of emotional reasons, but still it would be wrong for you to do it because you thereby harm and destroy another human being in society. And you can also go into that society. It's natural for human beings because, as you pointed out earlier, human beings are by nature social. And while it's true, as you said, that other animals can also be social, we could say that the sociality of human beings is unique in that it is related to our reason. We can be social with other human beings, not only in a very basic form of primitive association like other animals, but we can engage in each other with each other in higher ways. We can exchange ideas, we can talk about abstract things, and we can help each other become virtuous. And from there you can begin to argue for why society is natural for human beings and all that. And thus you could see that it is natural for human beings to be virtuous, to respect each other's property rights, etc. And yes, thus it could be the case that certain things, even though they might be driven by emotion, are immoral to do because they actually contradict human nature the way you're using them, or because they're disordered. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a very good point, and it kind of answers this question that has been bothering me, because yes, human beings can choose between different options, and certain of these choices will lead to a good outcome. Even just speaking from an egoistic perspective, certain of these choices will lead to a good outcome for yourself, and others will lead to a bad outcome. And as we said kind of in the last conversation, the purpose of morality is to make you, or to make the right choices so that you will become a good human being and live a good life as a human being. Now, for example, if you kill somebody, then the probability is quite high that someone will be upset and come back and perhaps kill or hurt you. And so it's not a good long-term strategy if people in society start killing each other. It's not even good, just egoistically speaking. And so therefore, certain choices lead to a good outcome and other choices lead to a bad outcome. And because human beings don't have this pre-programmed behavior, it is their kind of responsibility, or their they have to decide between these options, and that's exactly where morality comes in. So you can't just say, well, the drive to murder or rape comes from my human nature, and therefore murder or rape is good, because that's not how it works. Because the question is, yes, the drive comes from your human nature, but as you said, how you should act based upon not just this one drive, but the whole totality of emotions and drives and desires and attributes that you have, that is the relevant question.
Right, and also an important thing to think about is that human beings could be disordered in various ways. That is, there could be things or features which is natural to that human being to have originally or ultimately, but they have a false kind of order to it, so they have disorder. And this we can see with bodily forms of defects, like people who are born with bodily deformities. You could say that, okay, those cells or those things within their body, you could sort of trace it back to a way of being that is natural. However, that deformity is not natural because there is a disorder, things placed in certain ways that they are not supposed to be. And also people who are born, say, with just 4 fingers on the hand, well, it's natural to have 5 fingers, but some people are born with certain defects like 4 fingers, and that's unnatural because that's contrary to what he would have if his human nature according to his body would be fully according to what it should be. So you can have human beings who are doing bad things because they are disordered. There can be disorders in the body, as I pointed out, and also disorders in the soul, like how you use your emotions. You can use your emotions according to what is reasonable and rational, or you can let emotions take over you and let it go out of control, and thus act irrationally and have a disorder in yourself, because the orderly way you should be is to have reason above emotions. But if you turn it the other way around, it becomes disorderly, and that is things like Plato and Aristotle has talked about as well.
Yes, I think that's also a good point that you made here, that all the things might be natural, but they might be arrayed in a bad or suboptimal way, and in every person there are some things that are suboptimal. It's just in some there is perhaps a more severe or a disorder which has more severe consequences than, as for example, in a person who at some point decides that they will become a serial killer. And yeah, so that's a very good point that you brought up there. Also, just to draw the attention to this, I think it was also a very good point of view that the sociality of human beings is unique. And so even though human beings and chimpanzees and orangutans and gorillas and penguins and other animals are in a form social animals, that doesn't mean that this sociality is then always expressed in the same way or has the same characteristics. It is just on a very low resolution level. You see all of these animals live in groups with animals of their own kind, and that's kind of the common denominator. But of course it doesn't stop there. As you said, human beings can talk together about concepts, about virtues. They can interact, and they do interact in ways, and they also deem certain ways of interacting with each other as good or as bad, very different from penguins or orangutans. Because, for example, human beings think that rape is bad and shouldn't be committed, but it seems, according to this documentary that I have seen, that in orangutans it's quite normal. So yeah, these are different forms of social organization.
Right, and perhaps it could be argued even further that sociality involves interaction between intelligent beings, or that to be social means to have a relationship with persons, and that you can thereby argue that you can't really call interactions between other animals as truly social, that only human beings can be truly social in this sense, that they have, if sociality is understood as communication or interaction with intelligent beings or with persons. And also I could, just to have a note on persons, that also something that is unique about human beings as opposed to other animals, that we are persons. We are not simply creatures that can move around and have instincts like other animals, but we have an intelligence, and we have a will, and we have a personality. There is something about that which makes us literally personal, that you could say that makes us not only to be, that we can ask the question not only what we are, but who we are, that we are persons. That also something that is interesting to think about when it comes to human beings, that we are persons. And some would argue that we recognize each other as persons, and therefore we see a certain unique value in that, which further illustrates the value of, say, social interactions and the value of humanity as opposed to other animals.
Yes, I think I read this recently in a book that for example, chimpanzees also recognize each other on an individual level. So it's not that for a chimpanzee, just any other chimpanzee is the same, but for example, they recognize their mother or their child or their siblings, or they perhaps also have a kind of personality, in a sense that some chimpanzee is perhaps more easily angered and another one is perhaps more playful or something like that. But I would agree with you that it's perhaps on a different level of complexity, because through the faculty of reason and imagination and our very developed ability to communicate, there is much more of the internal life of another human being that you can perhaps share with or connect with. So at least this would be a thought that I have here. So it might also be gradual, but there might be still big differences between different species.